In the expanse of the stately Alterwood Manor, there was a spirit of bustle and anticipation of the coming evening. The servants, like bees in a hive, are scurrying back and forth, trying not to miss the slightest detail in preparation for the gala dinner. Every table, every tablecloth, every cutlery was arranged with the utmost care, for there was an event coming up that deserved impeccable attention to detail. In the shadow of this organized turmoil, not far away, with her hand pressed against the cold stone wall, stood Nellie Pepper. Her gaze darted behind the backs of the servants passing by, tired. She'd been depriving herself of the sweet embrace of sleep for days now, trying to make sure that every little detail was in its place, that every guest was satisfied. A challenge of no less importance awaited her ahead, attending the event itself, which required not only a physical but also a moral presence, for she had to ensure that the evening went flawlessly. This moment of measured time, when the whole world seemed to hold its breath waiting for the celebration to begin, Nellie Pepper devoted to last checks. She knew that the success of the evening depended on her vigilance and her ability to coordinate the actions of all the servants. Despite her invisibility behind the scenes of the big event, her role was no less important than that of its most visible participants. Nellie Pepper held more than just a high position in the Duchy of Alterwood's management hierarchy. Her role was critical. She was the central link that connected the many levels of governance of the duchy, being responsible for coordinating all aspects of it and reporting directly to Duke Lionel Altwood himself on all events and problems. This position required not only inexhaustible energy and full dedication, but also the ability to find a common language with a variety of people, from small servants to high-ranking aristocrats. However, despite her tireless work and loyalty to the cause, the very nature of her difficulties was closely intertwined with the character and behavior of Duke Lionel Altwood. Nellie, feeling the exorbitant weight of her duties, which every day only increased her exhaustion, appealed to the Duke for leave. She openly confessed that she feared for her health, saying that she might die of overwork. However, Duke Lionel, the person at the pinnacle of power in the duchy, did not seem to take her fears seriously. His response to Nellie's pleas was marked by levity. He confidently brushed off her complaints, assuring her that she would not die from her work. This indifferent reaction from the Duke not only reinforced the already heavy burden of responsibility resting on Nellie's shoulders, but also emphasized her isolation as she struggled with professional exhaustion. She found herself in a vicious circle where her anxiety and fatigue were invisible to anyone who could alleviate them. This added a heroic luster to her daily efforts to keep the duchy afloat, despite the personal suffering and misunderstanding of the Duke himself. Duke Lionel Altwood, in spite of his young age, entered upon the rights of administering his estates at the age of 14. His position was not just significant in the context of the Duchy of Alterwood, he was third in the line of succession to the imperial throne, making him a figure of extreme importance in the political arena of the empire. However, despite all these factors influencing Lionel's image as a duke and heir, his personality traits remained a mystery to many. No one could have guessed that beneath the mask of power and nobility lurked a man capable of displaying such emotional coldness and detachment, especially in response to the genuine concerns and needs of his subjects. Nellie Pepper, who had served the duchy and the Duke personally so faithfully, was in a particularly difficult position. Her fears and concerns about her own health and well-being were not exaggerated. She truly felt that her strength was running low and that she could literally die of overwork. In an attempt to find understanding and get at least some rest, she appealed to the Duke for help, sharing details of her exhaustion so desperately that she even mentioned the physical manifestations of her condition, such as a dry mouth, a clear sign of extreme dehydration and exhaustion. However, her words did not seem to resonate with the Duke's heart. His incomprehension and equanimity in the face of such a sincere plea for help could seem not just indifference, but a lack of basic human empathy. This behavior of the Duke emphasized his alienation not only from the personal difficulties of his servants, but also from understanding deep human feelings and needs in general. He created the image of a ruler imprisoned in his own world of power and duty, where even the most persistent calls for help could not penetrate. At one point, when tension and exhaustion had reached its climax, an incident occurred that became a milestone in the relationship between Nellie Pepper and Duke Lionel Altwood. Nellie, in a state of extreme exhaustion and emotional strain, suddenly felt herself under the intolerable gaze of the Duke, whose presence and proximity made her feel unexpected confusion and embarrassment. The situation escalated when the Duke, as if trying to get to the very core of her soul, asked a direct question about her sincerity, suggesting that Nellie might be hiding something or even lying to him. Nellie's reply, in spite of her inward indignation and resentment, was marked by a high degree of self-control, for she had not expected this kind of accusation from the man for whom she had served impeccably for many years. However, the Duke's next words, spoken in response to her reaction, came as a real blow to her. Duke expressed his fears that if she were granted an extended leave of absence, Nellie might use the opportunity to leave and not return, literally run away from her duties. This suggestion, so unfair and hurtful, caused Nellie to feel deeply indignant and angry. Her unwavering devotion and labor, invested in serving the duchy and Lionel himself for 3 long years, was called into question by a single baseless assumption. At that moment, Nellie realized that despite all her efforts and dedication, she had failed to win the Duke's trust, which was a source of deep resentment and disappointment for her. This episode not only emphasized the rift between them, but also revealed the complexity of their relationship, where power and submission are intertwined with personal emotions and mutual misunderstandings. In the depths of the castle, where the walls held 1,000 secrets, a scene unfolded, filled with tension and unspoken grievances. Nellie, a girl with a strong sense of self-worth, was angry with the Duke. She had no thoughts of escape at all, for responsibility for her actions was not foreign to her. Besides, she saw no place for herself outside these ancient walls where she could go, or to whom she could confide her hopes and anxieties. At that moment she was served dessert, which turned out to be the Duke's favorite treat. This small gesture might have been an attempt to ease the tension between them, or just a coincidence, but Nellie saw it as an opportunity for a small victory. Noticing the Duke's greedy gaze fixed on the sweet dish, she offered a deal that was more than a simple exchange of desserts. It was a test, a challenge in which she could gain the upper hand without resorting to verbal rebuke or open conflict. The offer to exchange desserts was not only a gesture of goodwill, but also a subtle indication that she was willing to compromise, even while maintaining her pride and principles. Those moments in that ancient castle were filled with the inner feelings of Nellie, who, absorbed in the moment, did not realize how her voice, overflowing with emotion, cut the air, addressing the Duke with unexpected abruptness. Feeling the effects of her outburst, she sought to restore the peaceful flow of their conversation, trying to ease the tension she herself had caused. In this process of reconciliation, as she watched the Duke enjoying his dessert, she suddenly noted that he seemed especially sweet at times like this. That observation made her heart beat a little warmer, despite all the past storm of emotions. Suddenly, however, an unexpected heaviness swept over her, as if a huge weight had been placed on her shoulders. The past 3 days, during which Nellie had only briefly dozed, had caught up with her at the most inopportune moment. The fatigue that had accumulated during this time suddenly made itself felt, making the world around her shake. Dizziness like a shroud descended on her mind. The world around her became unreal, and she felt herself growing weaker by the second, fighting the urge to fall right here and now. This moment was a test not only of her physical strength, but also of her will, striving to maintain a noble image in the eyes of the Duke and all present. Like a scene taken straight from the most exciting of novels, Nellie, struggling with the last remnants of her strength, suddenly found refuge in the Duke's arms. Her breathing became intermittent and heavy. Each breath seemed to be a struggle for life. At that moment, when the world around her seemed to fade and time was running out, she became acutely aware of the approach of death, whose cold fingers seemed to be already touching her soul. Gathering her will into a fist, Nellie tried one last time to address the Duke, wanting to convey her last thoughts and feelings to him. She wanted to say how much she valued every moment of her life and how eager she was to continue on this path, but the words faintly lingered in the air, melting into uncertainty and weakness. In her last impulse, prompted by the nearness of the end, she promised revenge on the Duke for what she believed to be his deprivation of the rest, which might have given her strength to go on living. But behold, in the next instant, as if magically, reality changed and Nellie found herself back in the past, in that momentous moment when she had first met the Duke. It was a period filled with hope and expectation, when the whole world seemed open to new beginnings, and the relationship between her and the Duke was just beginning to take shape, holding out the promise of something great and meaningful. This unexpected transition into the past opened a new page for Nellie, providing a chance to rethink and possibly change the course of her destiny. Nellie's life was short, but full of events that left an indelible imprint on her fate. Fate did not spare her from an early age, bringing down trials one after another. Just 20 years later, after years spent reclusive in the walls of an old mansion, her life's journey has come to an end, leaving behind only memories of how turbulent and tragic human destinies can develop. A fundamental moment in her life was the bitter farewell to her childhood at the age of only 10, when, after the death of her father, her mother, having lost all interest in her daughter's future, and consumed by her own passions and failures, squandered the remnants of the family fortune. Finding no support in her mother, who soon remarried and left her daughter to fend for herself, Nellie was forced to leave the nest. Moving in with her uncle marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, full of hardship and hardship. This moment of separation from her mother and home became the first of 3 key turns in her destiny, predetermining the further direction of her life path. Each of these turns was not just a step into the unknown, but a decisive test of her will and spirit, a forced choice when there seemed to be nothing left to choose. Nellie, whose childhood was ruthlessly stolen by circumstances, has found the strength to face future challenges despite the injustices that befell her on this life journey. The second decisive moment in Nellie's life came when she was 17 years old, at a time when her uncle and his wife were engaged in endless quarrels, poisoning the atmosphere in the house to the utmost. These quarrels were so frequent and intense that Nellie, in an effort to escape the discomfort of the home, was forced to spend nights in the living room, trying to find refuge there from the incessant storm of emotions. One day, in the midst of one such quarrel, her uncle suddenly proposed a plan that would solve the family's financial problems once and for all by asking Nellie to marry a neighbor, an old man on the verge of death, in order to take possession of his fortune upon his passing. This proposal hit Nellie like a thunderbolt, making her feel like a commodity that could be exchanged for material goods. Faced with a moral dilemma and deeply shocked by her uncle's proposal, Nellie refused to submit to this insane and self-serving plan. Her attempt to rebel against this decision was met with a categorical ultimatum. Either she agrees to the marriage, or she must leave the house. This moment was a turning point, forcing Nellie to face a harsh reality in which she was nothing more than a pawn in someone else's hands. Expelled from her last refuge, she faced an uncertain and unsettling future full of unknowns. This sudden and painful change in her life forced Nellie to rethink her place in the world and face the harsh realities of adult life, where morality and honesty often give way to self-interest and selfishness. Left alone to fight for her dignity and the right to choose her own path in life, she took a step into the unknown, leaving behind the house in which she had once sought refuge, but which now became a symbol of betrayal and loss. In a whirlwind of events shrouded in mystery and surprises, Nellie found before her an opportunity that seemed momentous. 4 years after she began looking for a new direction in her life, a door suddenly opened in front of her to a world she could only dream of. The position of steward of the mysterious estate beckoned to her as the light of a lighthouse beckons travelers in the night. Without the slightest idea of what secrets the walls of this ancient house held, she decided to take a chance. The intrigue was that there were rumors about the place, giving it a controversial reputation, which in turn scared away all potential candidates. Nellie, however, being the only one to show interest, didn't know if her decision would be a path to new opportunities or lead to something else. Nellie found herself standing on the threshold of her first day of work, but with one incredible difference. It was as if time had rewound, taking her back in time after her own death. This moment took Nellie by surprise, for she could not fathom how she had managed to cross the boundary of time and return to the world of the living, and at such a key moment in her life. Now, standing on the threshold of a new beginning, she tried to unravel the mystery of her incredible journey through time, searching for answers to the questions that troubled her mind. In the atmosphere of tense anticipation that enveloped the estate, the Duke, the owner of this place, possessed a gaze capable of penetrating through the very essence of a person. From the first moments of their meeting, he made it clear to Nellie that his trust was a rare and valuable commodity, and that her every action would be subject to vigilant observation. These words, spoken in the shadow of the ancient walls of the manor, were not just a warning, but a hint of the difficult trials that awaited Nellie ahead. In response to this, Nellie sank into deep thought. The realization that she had once fallen victim to immense demands and overwork made her determined not to make the same mistakes again. She was determined to endure and prove that she could not only survive but succeed in this new reality. But suddenly, like a lightning bolt cutting through the sky, a thought flashed through her mind, sharp and clear. Remembering her past death and realizing that she had a unique opportunity for retribution before her made her heart beat harder. This time she wasn't just fighting for survival. Nellie had a much more ambitious goal in mind, to avenge the Duke for all the grief and suffering she had been forced to endure because of his actions. So, a plan began to form in Nellie's mind. She knew that the road ahead would be thorny and dangerous, but she also knew that she had an advantage she had not had in the past: knowledge and experience. The Duke may have considered himself master of the situation, controlling every movement on his estate, but Nellie was now armed with wisdom and determination, bolstered by her unique journey through time. Trapped by circumstances beyond her control, Nellie realized that her former life and opportunities were irrevocably lost the moment she signed the contract. There was no going back to her previous state, and the only path before her was the path of revenge, which seemed the only way to restore justice. She decided that if her fate was inextricably linked to this estate and its owner, she would leave an indelible mark. Her strategy was subtle. The first step would be to gain the Duke's trust so as not to arouse suspicion of her true intentions. She planned to carefully and methodically infiltrate the affairs of the estate to learn its secrets and weaknesses. Then, when she becomes indispensable, Nellie will begin her game, slowly but surely undermining the foundations of the duchy's governance. Her purpose was clear: to damage the affairs of the estate in such a way that ultimately the full weight of the administration and the consequences of her actions would fall on the Duke's shoulders. She envisioned introducing small but significant changes to the daily routine and decisions that would gradually but inevitably lead to chaos and inefficiency in the governance of the duchy. Every move, every decision by Nellie will be thought out and calculated to ensure that the Duke, accustomed to order and obedience, will suddenly find himself at the center of a managerial collapse. And in the finale of her masterfully planned revenge, when the duchy would be in crisis and the Duke, drowning in problems, would feel the full weight of overwork and hopelessness, Nellie was going to disappear. Her goal was to leave him alone with all his problems, without the help and support he so relied on, so that he himself would suffer the same fate he had once indifferently inflicted on her. The idea of leaving the estate, even for good, flashed through Nellie's thoughts like the only ray of light in the dark realm of her present existence. However, the reality was brutal. Winter held the lands tenaciously in its cold embrace, making any attempt to leave not only excruciatingly hard, but also extremely dangerous. Moreover, such an enterprise required funds, which Nellie did not have. Her only source of income at the moment was her work for the Duke, which seemed to be getting more and more draining every day. The Duke did not seem intent on lightening her burden. On the contrary, he piled Nellie with more and more tasks, as if he were testing her strength or trying to compensate for some inner deficiency through overzealousness in her work. At these moments, Nellie remembered with special acuteness what had caused her previous death from overwork. History seemed ready to repeat itself again. At one such moment, when the strain had reached its climax, the Duke happened to catch a rough, tired, and disappointed look from Nellie. She met his gaze, full of incomprehension and hidden indignation that would make anyone wonder. But the Duke, despite a fleeting realization of the gravity of the moment, decided not to give it much thought. Instead of reconsidering his attitude or easing her burden, he indifferently remarked that it was necessary to gather information about the rumors that were spreading through the city. It was just another confirmation that the Duke did not see Nellie as a living person with her needs and feelings, but as a tool to accomplish his tasks. He did not see the person behind the work she was doing, nor did he realize how deeply his indifference hurt her. But Nellie, unlike him, had already realized that she could not afford to repeat past mistakes. Despite her outward submission, a plan was maturing inside her, and each new task, each new day brought her closer to the moment when she could put it into action. Traveling the winding roads of fate in the ducal carriage, Nellie contemplated a plan of revenge that would satisfy her desire for justice, but without leaving a stain on her own reputation or harming the innocent inhabitants of the duchy. As she pondered, she came to the conclusion that in order to achieve her goals, she would need reliable allies to support her in this difficult endeavor. To that end, she set out to meet with a man whose name had many people apprehensive, Pauth Levav. Pauth Levav was not known in the duchy for his prowess, but rather the opposite. His reputation left much to be desired. As an unemployed drunkard and ludomaniac, he gained fame as the duchy's chief scoundrel. Meeting with such a man did not bode well, but Nellie was convinced that in his person she would find an ally who would help her in the realization of her daring plan. A plan was already beginning to form in her mind to use his unique position in society and his, albeit dubious, resources to achieve her goal. Thus, by deliberately choosing a path that might seem dangerous and even reckless to many, Nellie was demonstrating her determination and willingness to take risks for the sake of a higher justice. Her journey in the carriage symbolized not only the physical movement to the meeting place, but also the inner journey to a solution that would require her to think outside the box and be willing to join forces with those whom society considered outcasts. Pauth Levav, despite his notoriety and multiple misdemeanors, seemed to unknowingly always find support in the person of the Duke himself. His name had appeared in the reports of the guards many times before, and he had even spent time under lock and key, but for reasons unknown, the Duke had invariably come to his rescue, saving him from legal punishment. This strange alliance between a high-ranking personality and a social outcast raised many questions and speculations among the population of the duchy. In the course of her elaborate plan for revenge, Nellie contemplated a cunning move that involved getting Pauth involved in a matter that seemed to benefit the community. She will offer him a large tract of land to cultivate, believing that, given his addiction to gambling and alcohol, Pauth will not be able to properly care for the land, and the entire crop will be irretrievably lost. Nellie was counting on the fact that, despite the predictable outcome, the Duke would still show his inexplicable mercy and be unwilling to punish Levi for his unsuccessful husbandry. To add weight to her actions and to ensure her own safety, Nellie took care to publicly announce in advance that she had nothing to do with the project, presenting her intervention as a charity for the needy. In this way, she sought to create a situation in which the Duke would be faced with a choice: admit his inconsistency in punishments and preferences, or sever his ties with Pauth once and for all, thus depriving him of his tacit support. It was a risky move, but it could be the key to her revenge strategy, allowing Nellie to manipulate the situation while remaining in the shadows. On one of those unusual days when fate and time intertwined to create a unique fabric of history, Nellie arrived at the administration building of her estate. Her visit began with warm greetings to the staff who ensured the well-being of her estate. However, the meeting took an unexpected turn when Nellie realized that the atmosphere around her was far from rosy. The condition of the workers was striking. Their weary faces and tired looks seemed to mirror Nellie herself on the eve of her own death in a past life. This picture evoked mixed feelings in her, ranging from deep empathy to acute pain for the ordeal they had endured. These people, staunchly bearing the burden of their responsibilities, may at some point have found themselves on the brink of their own survival, like Nellie, who had experienced similar circumstances in her past life. There was a conviction in her heart that without her timely intervention in the past, their fates could have turned out far more tragically. In this gloomy atmosphere, filled with heavy memories and experiences, Nellie and the estate staff found the strength to move on. Gathering their courage, they overcame the internal barriers that kept them from communicating openly. Finally, overcoming inner fatigue and emotional exhaustion, they found the courage to introduce themselves to each other, beginning a new phase in their shared history. This moment symbolized not only the beginning of understanding and cooperation between Nellie and her team, but also the restoration of hope for a better future for the estate and all its residents. These tired but indomitable employees, previously mentioned, carried a heavy burden on their shoulders. They were responsible for collecting all sorts of information and taxes throughout the duchy, a Herculean job requiring not only diligence and attention to detail, but also exceptional dedication. Their role was critical, for it was through their diligence that the duchy was able to function as a unit, each day overcoming many challenges and obstacles to thrive. Nellie, for her part, though she was only an intermediary passing the collected taxes and information to the Duke, was also immersed in an abyss of duties, no less significant and demanding. Realizing the magnitude of the task before her, Nellie couldn't help but recognize that she was facing a choice that could determine the future fate of the duchy. However, one thing gave her confidence. Thanks to her previous experience and knowledge accumulated in her previous life, she would not have to learn the basics of management and business from scratch. This fact gave her hope and encouragement at times when the task seemed almost insurmountable. After pondering her next move, Nellie concluded that the most prudent action would be to find Poth, a key employee who she was sure was currently at a local establishment where he preferred to spend his time. Her confidence in his location was not accidental. It rested on a good knowledge of the characters of her subordinates and their habits. Nellie knew that Pouth, despite his dedication to his work, also looked for moments of rest and relaxation, and the tavern was the one place where he could temporarily forget the burdens of work. With that thought, Nellie headed toward the tavern, ready to meet with Poth. Her determination and readiness for action was an indication of her leadership skills and deep concern for the good of the duchy. That morning, when Nellie, a representative of the high echelons of power, turned her attention to Pouth, the latter was struck by the unexpectedness of the encounter. His consciousness was instantly enveloped by a sense of his own importance, for to be seen by such a person did not happen every day. After introducing herself as the new manager of the duchy, Nellie instantly caused a wave of uneasiness in Pouth's soul. Thoughts of possible changes and new responsibilities made his heart beat more frequently. However, his anxiety was quickly dispelled when Nellie, as if sensing his excitement, offered him a job. This gesture not only reassured Pouth, but also awakened his curiosity and hope for new possibilities. The speed with which events unfolded was staggering. Soon after their conversation, a contract was already lying before Pouth, which provided for the land to be placed in his temporary possession for the period of sowing. The act caused a wave of surprise among Nellie's colleagues and co-workers as she made the decision to allocate as much as 4 acres of land to the most, in the opinion of many irresponsible residents of the duchy. This decision was not just unexpected, it shocked everyone, including Pouth himself. After all, no one could have guessed that Nellie would show such trust and give him a chance, causing a storm of emotions and gossip in society. This event was a turning point not only for Pouth, but for all the inhabitants of the duchy, forcing them to rethink their views on the distribution of responsibility and trust. Nellie's conditions placed on Pouth certainly added a new twist to the story. By limiting his choice of personnel to only tavern visitors, she created an unconventional situation for Pouth that required a great deal of ingenuity and willingness to make unorthodox decisions. Pouth, faced with such an unusual condition, found himself at a loss, wondering about the reasons for this choice. Nevertheless, his embarrassment was quickly replaced by determination. He not only accepted the challenge, but reacted with unexpected confidence, declaring that his services would be impossible to refuse. This moment emphasized his willingness to accept the money, despite all the oddities and uncertainties of the situation. Nellie, on the other hand, watching the situation, could not hide her satisfaction. Her evil grin, directed at the treaty, was a clear indication that she had her own far-reaching plans for the ducal fields. Her gaze, full of confidence that the fields would be destroyed, revealed the depth of the scheme in which Pouth played a key, though perhaps unwitting, role. This moment emphasizes the complexity of the relationship and the upcoming challenges that Poutu will have to overcome, as well as the dark intentions that Nellie has been harboring, hiding much deeper and perhaps darker plans for the future behind her smirk. In years past, Pouth had worn the proud title of knight, and his life had been filled with battles for honor and glory. Following the call of duty, he stood shoulder to shoulder with the Duke, his steadfast ally, in the heart of raging battles. However, fate, insidious and unpredictable, has prepared them for a test that shakes the foundations of their camaraderie. In one fateful moment, the Duke faced the betrayal of the person closest to him. This someone he thought was a friend turned out to be a traitor who sold crucial information to a hostile party. Faced with this pain, the Duke was faced with an unbearable choice: destroy his friend's life or continue the war. He chose silence, prolonging a conflict that had already drained many lives. At this time, far from the battlefield, at home, a tragedy was taking place that would change Pouth's life forever. His faithful life companion, his wife, swept away by the whirlwind of death, left this world while Pauth fought for the Duke. This loss plunged him into an abyss of despair and grief from which he could never find a way out. Pauth, once a proud knight, collapsed under the weight of his loss, becoming a drunkard and a debauchee. He, having lost all meaning and direction in life, was expelled from the army, which was the final chord in his downfall. In this way, Pauth's life became a gloomy shadow of his former existence. The former knight, once surrounded by glory and respect, now wandered the gloomy streets, contorted by grief and broken by the injustice of fate. He, lost and forgotten, has left behind not only his past, but also the hope of redemption that once led him forward. Duke Lionel's heart was filled with sorrow for Pauth's fate, for it was his mistake that prevented Pauth from saving his wife. The Duke's aide, carefully analyzing the circumstances, could not help but note the unusual nature of Nellie's decision to accept Pauth for service, for his reputation as a drunkard and debauchee was known far beyond their lands. He expressed surprise at this, emphasizing that Nellie should undoubtedly have been warned of the risks involved in such a decision. This surprise made the Duke think perhaps Nellie had information he didn't know about, information that could explain her decision. The doubts that arose prompted the Duke to decide to meet with Nellie to find out her motives. He felt the need for a private conversation, against the advice of his servants, who warned him against such a step, considering it inappropriate and unworthy of a knight. They reminded him that visiting a lady at such a late hour was not in keeping with chivalric tradition and could be considered a breach of etiquette. However, the Duke, who had long since ceased to see the world through the prism of chivalric ideals, paid no heed to these warnings. In a time when ominous shadows of the past always followed those with power, one Duke found that even the bright moments of his life were marred by betrayal and lust for power from those he considered close to him. After the grievous loss of his parents, when he was left alone among wolves clad in sheepskins, his life became an ongoing struggle for survival. The relatives, wishing to seize his title and influence, stopped at nothing, building insidious plots to eliminate the heir. In his quest for support and protection, the Duke turned to the only person he felt he could still trust, the Queen herself. She, realizing the depth of his despair and the danger that lurked for him in every corner of his own castle, decided to send him to the place where he could find refuge from intrigue, the battlefield. It was ironic that the whirlwind of war and the chaos of battle promised more security than the quiet of his hometown, where every shadow hid a potential assassin. However, even in this place where honor and valor seemed to be unbreakable pillars, betrayal came upon him in the person of a friend. This man, who had been side by side with the Duke through fire and water, ended up becoming his enemy, setting him up in a moment of dire need. The betrayal forced the Duke to reconsider his views on the world and the people around him. In the heart of battle, where every moment could be his last, he was forced to raise his hand against a friend, cutting short his life to preserve his own. This moment was a turning point, forcing the Duke to renounce chivalry, a symbol of honor and duty that was now tainted by treachery. Leaving the battlefield stained with the blood of enemies and friends, the Duke left behind not only his knighthood, but also the last vestiges of innocence and faith in humanity. With each step away from the battlefields, he walked towards an uncertain future in which his only companion was his determination to find a place where betrayal could not overtake him. In one of those rare moments when the halls of power were illuminated not by the splendor of royal regalia, but by genuine interest in the fate of one man, the Queen, possessed not only of majesty but also of insight, addressed the Duke with a question that made him swoon. She asked what skills he had to offer the world beyond swordsmanship and the ability to deliver deadly blows. Her gaze pierced through him, searching for the answer not so much in his words as in the depths of his soul. The Duke's silence was louder than any words, for he himself did not know what to say. For so long his life had been a struggle for survival. In that silence, the Queen saw not only a lack of response, but a hidden opportunity for transformation. With that thought in mind, she offered him a deal that could dramatically change his fate. If within 7 years he manages to prove his worth not through bloodshed on the battlefields, but through the greatness and prosperity of his duchy, she will no longer send him to war. This challenge from the Queen was not only a chance to avoid death on the battlefield, but also an opportunity to find a new purpose in a life that until then had seemed like an endless series of battles and losses. The stakes were high, however, for if he failed, he faced a charge of desertion which would inevitably lead to the death penalty, and time was not on his side. 2 of the 7 years the Queen had granted had already passed, leaving him only 5 years to change his fate and the fate of his lands. Thus, a new horizon of challenges opened up before the Duke. He had not only to rethink his own perception of the world and his place in it, but also to transform his duchy in such a way that its history would become an example of prosperity and wisdom for generations to come. This task required not only his leadership skills and strategic thinking, but also his ability to see beyond the battles and conflicts to which he was so accustomed. The Duke stood before an invisible enemy which he firmly believed had arrived in the person of Nellie. This revelation pierced the air, leaving a trace of shock in the hearts of the servants, whose faces turned pale with surprise. They, the servants, froze in indecision, not daring to dispute their master's words, but inwardly doubting his conclusions. Meanwhile, the Duke's aide, a man of open eyes and shrewd mind, entered the conversation with an important statement. He voiced the idea that it was such unfounded suspicions that caused the staff unrest. The servants, frightened and stunned, chose to flee from the walls of this place that had become a cage of fear and distrust for them. These words, like drops in water, dispelled the silence, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. The aide, begging for understanding, suggested that the Duke postpone any action until morning. His arguments were strong. Nellie needed rest, the peace of the night to gather her strength. The proposal brought common sense to the tense atmosphere by offering a temporary truce in the face of possible conflict. Everyone in the room felt the weight of those words, realizing that the truth would only be revealed with the arrival of a new day, when the sun would rise again over the horizon, promising to shed light on the dark corners of this tangled story. As the tension in the air reached a climax, the Duke remarked, not without irony, about his assistant's incredible ability to go without sleep, as if teasing his devotion and efficiency. In response, the aide, whose words were suddenly filled with fire and determination, exclaimed that his spirit and body had been hardened on battlefields where sleep was a luxury and survival a daily necessity. This admission of his martial past caused the Duke to reconsider his position. Recognizing the assistant's undisputed authority and experience, the Duke agreed to his proposal to postpone the proceedings until morning. But with one important condition, he will personally take it upon himself to check Nellie for espionage. At dawn, when the first rays of the sun were barely breaking through the dense curtain of morning fog, the deputy received Nellie. He endeavored to conduct this meeting with the utmost delicacy and tact, but in spite of his efforts, the Duke was not satisfied. The Duke felt that the meeting had dragged on for an inordinate length of time, which he thought might have given Nellie extra time to prepare, or even an opportunity to hide her true intentions. This expression of the Duke's displeasure could not go unnoticed. It awakened a wave of anxiety and fear in both Nellie and her meter. Nellie, faced with this reaction, felt even more lost and frightened, while the aide, experienced and battle-hardened, felt the growing tension for a moment, realizing that the upcoming trials would not be easy and would require all of his accumulated experience and wisdom. In the atmosphere of early morning, when the light fog had not yet had time to dissipate under the rays of the awakening sun, in one of the spacious and majestic halls of the castle unfolded a leisurely but very meaningful conversation between the Duke and Nellie. The Duke, a man of strict rules and unchanging traditions, expressed his bewilderment at Nellie's failure to appear by the appointed time before breakfast. He suggested that while she might have gotten a refresher after their meeting, there would be nothing wrong if she postponed the meal until after lunch. The Duke, without concealing his surprise, noted that such a minor change in routine was unlikely to have seriously affected her well-being. Nellie, on the other hand, was inflamed by such a remark. Her response was clear and emotional. Skipping meals before lunch would cause her temperature to rise, which would be highly undesirable for her. Her words sounded like a challenge, challenging the Duke's assumption that the change in routine was insignificant. In response to her outburst, the Duke revealed a part of his personal life that was unknown to most. With unyielding calmness, he revealed that he himself had not maintained a normal eating and resting routine for the past 6 years. He emphasized that he felt quite healthy despite this regimen. He wanted to show that the human body is capable of adapting to different conditions, and that will and discipline can help overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. After an exchange about the importance of adherence to daily rituals and the ability to adapt to a challenging life, the conversation between Nellie and the Duke took a new turn. Nellie, though stunned to learn of the Duke's strict life principles, made it clear that she had no desire to follow his example. Her amazement was mixed with undisguised respect for his endurance, but she saw no way for her to accept such a lifestyle. While emotions were still in the air, the Duke, a man of action and rectitude, decided to turn the discussion into a more concrete direction. He asked a question concerning the inheritance of lands, which was the main reason for the meeting. The specifics of this issue were why exactly Pouth got valuable land. Nellie, for her part, was prepared for such a development. She had not only expected this question, but had carefully prepared for it. With a confidence and clarity that could only come from deep thought and observation, Nellie presented her point of view. She defended Pouth, highlighting his strength as a man and as a father raising his son alone. Her words were not only supportive of Pouth as a worthy man, but also recognized his responsibility and moral stability. In Nellie's opinion, giving land to Powhatu was not just the right decision, but a necessary act to support and reward him for his perseverance and ability to not give up in the face of life's challenges. She emphasized that giving land to a person who has not only proven to be a strong individual, but is also raising the next generation is investing in the future. In her words was the conviction that a man like Pouth should not be allowed to soak up his talents and opportunities, which would be not only his personal loss, but a loss to society as a whole. The next twist in their dialogue was the Duke's question, which seemed to take Nellie by surprise. He asked with perplexity and keen curiosity how she had learned of Pouth's son's existence, given that she had just started her job and seemingly had no way of familiarizing herself with the personnel files. This moment was a test for Nellie, for her knowledge of Pouth's marital status might have seemed mysterious and inexplicable, given her short tenure. For a moment, Nellie seemed to be in a quandary, searching for an answer to a question that might have undermined her credibility as a new employee. However, after a brief pause in which she may have been going through all the variations of her recent interactions in her mind, an explanation suddenly occurred to her. She recalled that she had met Pouth in person yesterday, and no one knew the details of the meeting. She said Pouth, while lightly intoxicated, became unexpectedly candid and shared some details of his personal life with her, including mentioning his son. A sudden surprise swept over Duke at her response, as he hadn't expected anyone to want to communicate with Pouth. Not hiding his amazement, he asked Nellie for clarification, trying to understand what exactly had prompted her decision to give him the land for the crops. Calmness and confidence were reflected in Nellie's response, who did not hesitate to explain that the choice of Pouth as manager was not random. She argued that his physical attributes were ideal for the tasks ahead, emphasizing that his natural ability and resilience made him the perfect candidate for the role. Duke, for his part, expressed his hope that the trust placed in Pata would be justified. He emphasized the gravity of the situation, pointing out that Powta's successes and failures in land management would have a direct reflection on Nellie. There was a note of caution in his words. If any problems arose, the responsibility for solving them would fall on Nellie's shoulders. This statement emphasized the importance of choosing the right steward for the lands and the Duke's undoubted trust in Nellie's ability to make informed decisions. At the dawn of a new day, the sun had barely touched the treetops when Nellie and the Duke set out on a journey filled with expectations. Their way lay to the administration building, where the Duke expected to evaluate Nellie's abilities, believing that it was there, in the conditions of the real business world, her true qualities of a manager would manifest themselves. However, fate had decided otherwise. Suddenly, as the carriage wove through the morning road chill, it suddenly staggered over a rock in the path, triggering a series of events worthy of a novel. Nellie lost her balance, and as if fate was playing its game with them, she found herself in the Duke's arms. At that moment, time seemed to stop. The Duke put his arm around her, protecting her from falling, and there was an expression of deep concern and worry for her well-being in his eyes. They looked into each other's eyes, a little perplexed by the situation. As quickly as it came, Nellie bounced back, trying to regain the distance between them, but the moment of closeness could no longer be erased. The Duke, still under the impression of what had happened, noticed the calluses on her hands. This discovery surprised him, for it was not often that one saw such signs of a working life in a woman of high society. His surprise deepened when Nellie explained with casual frankness that her nobility was not full-blooded, but only half-blooded. This moment not only revealed a new facet to their relationship, but also emphasized Nellie's difficult journey in a world where nobility and diligence rarely go hand in hand. Their journey was suddenly interrupted by an unexpected circumstance. The carriage fell awkwardly into an inconspicuous hole in the road. The Duke, without wasting a second, suggested a change of plans. He suggested that we continue on horseback so as not to lose precious time. Nellie, who had never experienced the thrill of riding until that moment, was met with a challenge she wasn't prepared for. She had never learned to ride a horse, which put her in a particularly vulnerable position. The Duke, possessing not only nobility of blood but also nobility of soul, took the initiative. With an ease as if he were lifting a feather, he took Nellie in his arms and gently set her before him on the mighty horse. Then the Duke himself jumped up on his horse, providing solid support and protection. From that moment on, they rushed together as one toward the control building, traversing space at a windy speed that was a completely new and exhilarating experience for Nellie. The speed at which they were moving caused Nellie to have mixed feelings. She was both stunned and frightened. To comfort her and give her confidence, the Duke, with imperturbable calmness, suggested that Nellie hold on to his arm. There was so much care and understanding in that gesture, but he made a remark about her physical weakness that, despite his good intentions, caused Nellie's resentment to surge. She felt insulted by this assessment of her abilities, for her spirit was far stronger than the Duke could have imagined. This moment was not only a test of physical intimacy and trust for Nellie, but also a test of her inner strength and independence. After a rough and unusual journey, finally their horse slowed to a run and they stopped at the destination. Nellie, breathing a sigh of relief, silently hoped that this was the first and last ordeal of its kind on their journey together. But once they had just arrived, she was seized by a sudden epiphany that shed light on the true reasons for the Duke's decision. Remembering his words and actions along the way, Nellie came to a disappointing conclusion. The Duke apparently distrusted her. His intention was not just to test her ability to maintain her composure in a stressful situation, but to assess her ability to resist and defend herself. In short, to test her strength and see her true core. The Duke had noted, as if in passing, that their acquaintance was too short to build up complete trust, and suspicion in such a case was a natural reaction. This revelation was a cold shower for Nellie. She realized her mistake. In her assumption of the Duke's mistrust, she was basing her assumption on her own memories of her past life, forgetting that to the Duke she was only a recently appeared mysterious figure in his life. Nellie realized how ridiculous and naive it was to expect the Duke to trust her unconditionally, for she was the only one with knowledge of her past and the connections she had carried through time. This moment became for Nellie not only a test of the strength of their relationship, but also an important lesson in the importance of trust, understanding, and patience in building any relationship, especially with such complex and multifaceted characters as the Duke. Accepting the situation with a dose of philosophical calm, Nellie realized that the Duke had every reason to doubt her attitude. As she shared the parting words, she felt the weight of missed intimacy, realizing that despite the brief moments of joy and shared happiness they had managed to share, she remained only a mysterious stranger in his eyes. This realization filled her heart with sadness and longing for the lost time that could have fostered a deep trust and understanding between them. Nevertheless, with her will in her fist, Nellie decided not to give up under the weight of the moment. She reminded herself to move forward, leaving behind the shadows of doubt that marred their relationship. With renewed vigor and determination, she set to work, eager to prove to herself and others her worth and ability to overcome the obstacles before her. A few days later, when household cares and work routine seemed to be a well-established routine, Nellie faced a new unexpected challenge. It was time for a shocking field inspection, an event that was going to call into question everything she had been working towards and working for lately. This new turn of events has not only tested her strength, but also provided an opportunity to look at the changes around her from a different angle, reevaluate her priorities, and, perhaps, open new horizons for herself and her place in this complex and changing world. Every square centimeter of these lands seemed polished to perfection. Not a single weed could be found in this perfect sea of green. Nellie, standing at the edge of one of these fields, gazed into its flawlessness, amazed and disappointed at the same time. She wondered how the outcome of her plan could have turned out this way. It seemed to her that only yesterday she had thought of everything in detail, but now a picture of utter failure appeared before her eyes. The culprit, she thought, was the Duke, whose threats must have made the workers double-check every corner of the field, depriving her scheme of any chance of success. Suddenly, from behind crept Pauth, whose appearance was so unexpected that Nellie almost jumped on the spot. Pauth, known for his tendency to avoid all work, seemed the last person she expected to see at such a moment. His appearance spoke for itself. The man was drenched in sweat, as if he had just completed a marathon in the blazing sun. Nellie was stunned by this transformation. Pauth, who usually avoided all physical activity, seemed to have turned into an invisible hero, embodying all the hardships he had gone through. This moment was a turning point in their relationship and Nellie's perception of the situation as a whole, bringing a mixture of amazement and new hope into her soul. Until a couple of days ago, nothing had heralded trouble. When she arrived on his doorstep, she found him in a state of complete relaxation. He rested carefree, being in his usual state of unwillingness to do hard work. Pauth easily complained of the fruitless effort required to work the field, which he said was strewn with stones and overgrown with weeds to such an extent that any attempt to tidy it up seemed to him utterly futile. These words of his sounded like another labor excuse, so familiar and expected that Nellie was hardly surprised. But as she watched his diligence during these last days when, shrouded in sweat, he worked with an unprecedented zeal, Nellie could not escape the thought that something unusual had happened to Pauth. The thought of illness crept into her mind. It seemed to be the only thing that could explain such a drastic change in his behavior. But that hunch soon dissipated as she looked more closely at his figure. Pauth's musculature was so well developed that it was as if carved from stone, his body seemingly built for the relentless physical exertion typical of farm labor. This discovery puzzled Nellie. Before her stood a man who possessed everything necessary for success on earth, but who had ignored his abilities for so long. This contrast between his previous inactivity and his present exertion, between the lazy recluse and the athletic farmer, aroused in Nellie a feeling of deep amazement and a new admiration. She began to see in Pautha not merely a lazy man who avoided work, but a man capable of great accomplishments if he could find in himself the impetus for action. In her endeavor to undermine Pauth's efforts and thereby deal a blow to the Duke's plans, Nellie resorted to skillful tactics. She began showering him with compliments, but did so skillfully that her words, though sounding like praise, were calculated to undermine his motivation to continue working. This approach was so unexpected and confusing to Pauth that it caused him mixed feelings. Suddenly overwhelmed with emotion, Pauth could not contain himself and exclaimed that Nellie would soon regret her decision to hire him. This outburst of feeling was so vivid and sincere that Nellie was momentarily puzzled by his reaction. Seeing his condition, she decided to change her tactics to soften the situation. Given the hot weather, she offered Pauth a tent so he could rest and recuperate in the shade, sheltered from the scorching rays of the sun. This suggestion confused Pauth even more. He became embarrassed, not expecting such attention from Nellie. Despite his embarrassment, Nellie was determined to go all the way in her efforts to antagonize the Duke, even if she had to use less than obvious methods to do so. She was willing to do anything to jeopardize the progress Duke had made, even if it meant playing difficult emotional notes with Pauth. Nellie, illuminated by a dream of drying up every last drop of the Duke's wealth, resorted to cunning, enlisting the help of an unexpected ally. Her sinister laughter, filled with bad omens, echoed in Pauth's heart, causing him inexplicable anxiety. That sound, like a curse, caused him to retreat, choosing to temporarily withdraw into himself. Pauth, depressed by the sudden fear, decided to take a break, which, by a strange coincidence, came earlier than usual. This moment of insight for Nellie was confirmation that she had chosen the right person for her devious plan. She saw Pauth as the key to destroying the fields, part of a larger game against the Duke. Soon enough, however, feeling excited and embarrassed by his actions, Auth slowly made his way toward Nellie. His movements were uncertain, as if each step brought him closer to the unknown. With a confused expression on his face that reflected his inner conflict and indecision, he beckoned to the other workers. This gesture was full of symbolism. Pauth, despite his hesitation, was ready to follow Nellie in realizing her plan. His decision to bring the workers together acted as a bridge between the initial certainty of his isolation and the new role he had to fulfill in the story. Nellie's meeting with the workers turned into a moment of genuine emotion and an almost physically tangible connection. The workers, those indomitable guardians of the fields, met her with open hearts on the verge of tears, which testified to their deep affection and devotion to their work. These were not mere tears of joy at seeing Nellie. They were expressions of relief and hope that flared up again in their weary souls. Nellie, feeling the excitement of the meeting, could hardly hold back her tears. She realized that in front of her stood people whose lives were inextricably linked to the fields and whose work was directed solely to the benefit of these lands. A realization was dawning in her heart that Pouth's words about the break were nothing more than a lie to call in the workers. Pouth, in turn, revealed to Nellie the pages of his life filled with tragedy and despair. After losing his wife, it was as if he lost himself in the world, finding no strength or motivation to continue working. His temper became an invisible wall separating him from opportunity, and he slipped into a state of apathy, feeling alienated and devoid of any value. Pouth shared that his decision to give up acting and work was not so much a choice as a consequence of circumstances that left him alone with a sense of his own irrelevance. These revelations served as a bridge between past and present, between despair and hope, linking the fates of Nellie, Pouta, and the workers into a single story of resistance and survival. The workers, willing to labor for the common good, and Pouth, exhausted by personal loss and struggles with his own temper, together formed pictures of human resilience and the will to live. It wasn't just a reunion of a work team, it was the rebirth of a community of people willing to overcome hardship for the greater purpose of revitalizing and prospering their land. As Pouth began to open up, Nellie experienced a thrill of excitement as she tried to interrupt him, afraid of where this conversation might take them. Pouth did not stop, however, and his words filled the air with a peculiar sincerity. He confessed how much he appreciated Nellie's trust and talked about how her support was a light in the darkness for him. Even at times when Pouth seemed completely indifferent to the work, inwardly he felt its influence. It was thanks to Nellie that he found the strength to begin to take action, to eventually bring the field into perfect condition. This revelation stumped Nellie. She, eager to destroy the field, could not understand how her actions could have led to such a result. Thoughts of destructive plans swirled in her mind, a plot to deplete the Duke's treasury by doing so at the hands of Pouth. But instead of the expected chaos and destruction, the perfect field that Pouth had spoken of with such pride and appreciation appeared before her eyes. It was the exact opposite of her original intentions. Pouth's words about how important Nellie's support was to him and how she inspired him to work hard to bring the fields to perfection made her rethink her actions and motives. Suddenly, faced with an unexpected outcome, Nellie began to see the situation from a different angle. She was now faced with the dilemma of an internal conflict between the desire to destroy and the unintentional inspiration to create, which led to a very different result, far from the one originally conceived. In the depths of the land, where every piece of soil had its own history, there was a moment of sincere human unity. The workers, exhausted by their hard work, could not hold back their tears when they heard Pouta's moving story. This man who had brought so much hardship into their lives finally revealed his heart to them, confessing that he had been forcing them to work mercilessly for the past few days. But instead of anger and resentment, the workers found compassion and decided to join forces for a common goal. All of them, as one, gathered together and directed their steps toward Nellie, the girl who seemed to have lost all her hopes of retribution. The field he had been given to sow was now the best he could find in the land. Nellie, standing in the face of incredible support and unity, felt her heart fill with sadness. All her dreams of revenge against the Duke seemed to crumble in the face of this act of human compassion and mutual aid. She realized that the only path left to her was to try to get Pouth to resign. Under the glow of the patronizing sun, blown by a gentle breeze that carried the scent of freshly cut grass and earth, Nellie made her way through the vast fields. Her steps were slow and weary, as if each one required exorbitant effort on her part. Around her, labor was boiling. Workers, residents of the duchy who respected their lands and the Duke, carefully tended the fields, ensuring a bountiful harvest. These people, accustomed to hard work, could not but notice Nellie's exhausted state, and their looks, full of empathy and at the same time incomprehension, accompanied her at every step. Nellie, feeling these glances, felt an inner struggle. Her heart was filled with a tight pile of unspoken words and feelings, which she could barely contain, trying not to let her emotions spill out onto the people around her. Deep down, she knew that these people didn't deserve her anger. They were only expressing their concern and care. In the end, Nellie decided to resort to a little subterfuge, saying that her fatigue was only the result of her long acquaintance with the workers, although in fact the causes of her exhaustion were deeper and far more complex. The laborers, every one of whom was an inhabitant of the duchy, and worked these lands, not only for the crops they could take for themselves, but also for the handsome remuneration bestowed by their duke, accepted her words without apparent doubt. Their lives were inextricably linked to these fields, and every day they put a part of their souls into cultivating the land, receiving in return not only material rewards, but also the satisfaction of knowing their importance to the prosperity of the duchy. In this world where every day was filled with hard work and simple joys, Nellie searched for her place, trying to find harmony between her inner experiences and the outer world that demanded her strength and determination. In the middle of an ordinary day filled with routine cares and endless tasks, something happened that awakened in Nellie a feeling of warmth and gratitude. Amidst the usual chaos of the workday, when everyone was absorbed in their duties, this kind-hearted manager decided to show concern and share part of her lunch with Nellie. Despite her initial embarrassment and modest attempts to refuse the offered bounty, Nellie could not resist this woman's insistence. The extended potato was not just a gesture of goodwill, but a reminder of why Nellie values her work so much despite the challenges. This small, seemingly insignificant act lit up Nellie's day with the bright light of human kindness and attention to her neighbor, returning her faith that even in the most mundane routine can be found sources of joy and satisfaction. At the same time, this act of generosity made Nellie remember her resentment towards the Duke, who seemed to be far from understanding such simple human values. There was still a spark of anger in her heart toward this man who she felt was incapable of appreciating true kindness and humanity. This contrast between the manager's selfless generosity and the Duke's indifference emphasized Nellie's deep frustration with some aspects of her workplace, but she could not deny that it was moments like the lunchtime episode that gave her work a special meaning and made it important not only to herself, but also to those around her. Nellie was in a state of deep disappointment and anxiety. Poth, whose behavior she had serious misgivings about, gave no apparent reason for dismissal, which put her in a quandary. She was absorbed in contemplating how to deal with this delicate situation when suddenly a little boy ran up to her, sincerely expressing his gratitude that she had hired his father for the job. This moment brought confusion to her soul, for Nellie could not at once realize who she was talking about. The boy introduced himself as Jerome, Pouth's son, and his words came like thunder to Nellie. This revelation made her look at the situation from a completely different angle. Jerome shared with warmth in his voice how his life and his father's life had changed for the better because of Nellie. Jerome tells how Pouth was going through a difficult time, struggling with personal demons, but Nellie's decision to give him a job was the turning point. Through this opportunity, he not only stopped drinking and gained stability, but was able to return to being responsible for his son's well-being, promising to be a good father to him. These words from little Jerome awakened a wave of emotion in Nellie. She realized that she often did not notice how deeply her decisions could affect the lives of others, even if they seemed small or insignificant. Jerome and Pot's story reminded her that kindness and compassion can work miracles, giving people back their faith in themselves and giving them a chance at a new life. This unexpected turn of events caused Nellie to look at Pouth in a new way, seeing him not only as a co-worker, but as a man on the road to reform and striving for a better future for herself and her son. After meeting Jerome, Pot's son, Nellie is faced with a difficult decision. She realized that firing Pouth would not only deprive him of the opportunity to provide for himself and his son, but would also deprive the boy of hope for a better future. This realization gave Nellie a new perspective on her intentions towards the Duke, illuminating the fact that the price of revenge might be too high if it touched the innocent. With these thoughts, she entered the control room, where another picture of resilience and perseverance came into view. Her subordinates sat at their desks, absorbed in their work. Though their bodies were bruised and exhausted from the past battles and the current continuous labor, their spirits remained unbroken. All three used to be knights descended from commoners who switched to paperwork due to their injuries. The transition from sword to pen was not an easy ordeal for them. Wounds received on the battlefield slowed them down, but did not stop them. During their time in the control room, they learned to read and write, which was no less an accomplishment than their exploits in battle. Every piece of paper, every record and report was a testament to their incredible ability to adapt and grow even in the most adverse circumstances. This moment awakened in Nellie an even greater respect for her subordinates. They were a living reminder that even after the hardest blows of fate, one can find the strength to get up and move on, overcoming new challenges and obstacles. Seeing their tenacity and dedication, Nellie realized that her role as a leader is not only to manage and guide, but also to support and inspire her team, giving them the opportunity to reach their potential, but most importantly, to relax. It was another lesson that life taught her that day, reminding her of the importance of compassion, mutual aid, and an indomitable spirit in the face of any adversity. Even though Nellie hadn't slept in 24 hours, Sophie hadn't rested in over 3 days with absolutely no sleep, and so Nellie decided to work for her.